Hello! This video is going to be on the quadratic formula. When we're talking about solving quadratic equations in algebra, at this point you've already seen how to solve them by factoring. And I love factoring. You've gotten really good at factoring. Factoring to solve makes it pretty quick to solve the quadratic formulas, the quadratic equations. But the problem with factoring is that it does not work for every equation. At some point, you're going to get an equation where you're trying to factor it out and it's just not going to happen because not everything can be factored. The good news is there are more than one way to solve quadratic equations. The second way we're going to be looking at is the quadratic formula. The great thing about quadratic formula is it works for every equation. There's never going to be an equation that you can't solve with quadratic formula. So why don't we just always use this? Well, the problem with quadratic formula is it's a big formula. There's no way to sugarcoat that. It's a big formula. Takes longer to use. Takes longer to use because the formula looks like this. We say x equals, or whichever variable your equation has, equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, oh, we're not done yet, divided by 2a. So that formula is a beast of a formula. It's quite large. So that's why we have more than one method. My advice is if you look at an equation and you know how to factor it, solve by factoring. It's going to be the easier way than using all of this. But we have this as a backup for if you look at an equation and just don't know how to factor it, maybe you can, maybe it is factorable, but you just don't know how to do it. Or for those equations that you just can't factor. So this will be option number 2. In the notes or the lesson today, I'm going to give you some equations that you could solve by factoring. This is one of them. If I had this equation outside this lesson, I would be solving it by factoring. But to practice with the formula, we're going to be using the formula for this one. Looking at this formula, the formula's got a bunch of a, b's, and c's. Those a, b's, and c's are coming from, I'm going to put it down here, that quadratic form, which says ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we're lucky for this first problem because our equation already equals 0. If it does not equal 0, just like when you were solving by factoring, you need to make it equal 0. Once it's in this form, though, it's easy to see that a is going to be the number 1, b is the number positive 2, and c is going to be the number negative 15. So our first step for using this formula, we've got a formula, we've got numbers. You may be able to guess what we're going to do. We're going to do some substitution. We're going to substitute those 3 numbers in this formula for a, b, and c. And you want to make sure you get every single a, b, and c. So that first part, it says negative b. You're going to put negative, and then b is the number 2. So negative 2 plus or minus square root of b squared. B is the number 2 again, so it's going to say 2 squared minus 4 times a is the number 1, times c. C is the number negative 15. Don't forget that negative sign. Make this a little longer. All over 2a. So 2, and then a is the number 1. I told you, it's a beast of a formula. It's quite large. The rest of this is just going to be us doing all of this math. Once you've substituted everything in, to get our answer, we just have to figure out what all of this equals. A strategy for doing all of this math is start off by trying to figure out what the square root is. So for now, I'm just going to copy that negative 2, copy the plus or minus, and I'm going to focus on doing as much math in here as I can. So I could say 2 squared is 4. When you go to multiply all of this, you can do it all in one go if you're feeling really good about the multiplication, or you can do it a step at a time. What we need to do is 4 times 1, get an answer, and then multiply that answer by 15. Sometimes I see students distribute. They say 4 times 1, 4 times 15. That's not what this is. So we could say, I'll do it in extra steps just so you can see. We could say 4 times 1. Well, that's 4 times our negative 15. I'll do that in the next step. And then all of that, make sure that division line is going across everything. All of that's divided by 2 times 1, we'll just go ahead and say 2. I'm trying to save room on the board, so I'm going to put the next part over here. Well, that is the same thing. I'm going to copy -2 plus or minus square root. I've got 4. I can finish multiplying this now. You might have done it all in one step earlier, but we can go ahead and say -4 times -15. Well, first negative times negative goes positive. 4 times 15 is 60, all divided by 2. We're going to keep going. I'm going to definitely run out of board. This equals, I've got my -2 plus or minus square root of 4 plus 60 is 64, all over 2. Remember, the goal is to do as much math as we can with the square root. So there's one last thing we can do with that square root, and that is -2 plus or minus the square root of 64, which is 8. A common mistake I see my students make is they write the square root of 8. You're taking the square root of 64. The square root of 64 is 8, so we don't need any more square root sign. Once you take the square root, you don't need to copy the square root. And we get all of that over 2. I would say this is like step 2. Step 1 is substituting into the formula. Step 2 is doing all the math until you've got your square root all done. The next part is going to be what to do with this plus or minus sign. I'm trying to decide. I think the best strategy is to tilt the camera down. Hello. So the next part is what to do with this plus or minus sign. That plus or minus sign means exactly what it says. You're going to write it with a plus, or you're going to write it with a minus. So when I go to do this, it's going to change to 2 separate fractions. I'm going to write -2 plus 8 over 2, and I'm going to write -2 minus 8 over 2. So that plus or minus sign, you're going to write it one way with a plus sign and one way with a minus sign. The rest of this is just doing that math. So we could say, well, -2 plus 8, that is 6 over 2, which equals 3. -2 minus 8, that is -10 over 2, which equals -5. Is there still room? So our final answer, we were solving up here for x. Our final answer is going to be x equals 3 or -5. It's long, right? Like, I know, I can't lie to you. It's a long problem because the quadratic formula is so big. That said, usually the first time I do this with students, it takes us like 5 minutes. I have no clue how long it's taken at this point, but probably around like 5 minutes. But the more of these you do, the more practice you get, the more confident and comfortable you get. I promise they're not going to take as long as they do the first time you do them. It's just a matter of feeling more comfortable with them. What I am going to do is I'm going to put a second question up, and then I think we'll do it like chunk by chunk together. I'm going to erase all this. The next one I'm going to look at. Let's do 3y squared minus y equals 2. Looking at this equation, I want you to think for a second, what do you think the first step is going to be? If you're thinking like we did before, like label A, B, and C, you're close, but there's one thing that's different about this equation, and that's it equals 2 this time and not 0. So we've got an extra step if we need to make it equal 0. We can do that by subtracting 2 on both sides. I'm putting that -2 here instead of under one of these because none of those are like terms. So all it's going to end up being is 3y squared minus y. I'm just going to put that -2 next to them, and now it equals 0. After we've done that, now our next step is label A, B, and C. Maybe it feels silly to do that, but I've seen a lot of students substitute the wrong number in the wrong place or forget a sign when they don't label them. So I truly do think it helps. You could write it off to the side if you wanted, like A equals B equals C equals, or you could do it like I did in that first problem where you just write it above. I'm going to put it over here this time. I'm going to say A is the number 3, B is the number -1, and C is the number -2. Once we've got A, B, and C, what do you think the next step is? Hopefully you're saying something like substitute into the formula, and if you are, you would be correct. I'm going to put the formula on the board for you to try to substitute, and then after that I'm going to erase it. The formula we want to substitute, it's going to start off y this time because we've got y's in our equation. Y equals -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what I'm going to ask you to do, pause the video, see if you can substitute these numbers into the formula. Just substitute. Don't worry about doing the math yet. All right. Hopefully you paused the video. You tried. What it should look like, we want it to say -b. I think this is the trickiest part after doing that first example. We want -b, but b is already negative. So it's going to end up saying -1 or just +1 because we know negative times negative goes positive. You can write -1 if you want. I think for me at least it's just easier since I know it's positive just putting +1 so I don't have to worry about all those negative signs. After that it should say instead of b squared we want it to say -1 squared minus 4 times a is 3 times c is -2 all over 2a, and a is 3. Go ahead, since you already tried substituting yourself, just make sure what you have on your paper looks like this. If it does, that's awesome. If it doesn't, that's okay. That's why we're watching this video, right? To learn. After we've got it all substituted in, what is the next thing we want to do? If you're saying do the math, yeah. Specifically doing the math around the square root area though. So again, I'm going to ask you pause the video. Don't finish solving the entire thing. Just focus on doing the math in the square root and see what you get for a square root, like square root of what number. And go. Okay. Hopefully you tried. What it's going to look like is we've got y equals 1 plus or minus square root. Be careful with the -1 squared. -1 squared is -1 times -1. That's going to be a +1. And then when we go to multiply this, again, you can do it all in one go if you want, or in steps. I would say -4 times 3 is -12 times our -2. All over 2 times 3, we can go ahead and say is 6. And that's going to equal 1 plus or minus square root of 1 -12 times -2 is +24. All over 6, I'm going to come over here, which is the same thing as 1 plus or minus square root of 1 plus 24 is 25. All over 6. I asked you to stop here around the square root of 25. You might have gone a step further and said square root of 25. Well, we could say that's the same thing as 1 plus or minus square root of 25 is 5. We get that all over 6. And I'm going to pause here to make some more room so I don't have to tilt the camera down again. Once we've got the square root all finished, do you know what our next step is going to be? The next step has to do with that plus or minus sign. That next step is going to be separating this into two fractions. One with a plus sign, one with a minus sign. And then doing the math. So at this point, I'm going to ask you, pause the video one last time. Try to finish this problem. See what you get for your two answers when you separate that plus or minus sign. Welcome back. Do you have answers? Well, it's going to look like one of them saying 1 plus 5 over 6. And then the other one saying 1 minus 5 over 6. For this one, 1 plus 5 is 6. So we get 6 divided by 6, which is 1. For this other one, 1 minus 5. 1 minus 5 is negative 4 over 6. Maybe you panicked a little bit when you saw this, but this is just like any old equation. Equations can have fraction answers, so we're not doing anything wrong right now. What I will ask you to do is simplify if you can. So looking at this, we could simplify by dividing by 2. So if I divide both numbers by 2, on top we get negative 2, and then for our denominator we get 3. So for our final answer, our variable was y. Final answer is going to be y equals the 1 from over here, or our fraction here, y equals 1, or negative 2 thirds. Ta-da! Final answer. This also was one that you could solve by factoring. I know that sometimes when there's that coefficient there, that can be more tricky for students. So if you looked at this and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I feel real confident on factoring that, this could be an opportunity where quadratic formula might help you out, so you don't have to factor. Hopefully this video helps. There is going to be a part 2 on quadratic formula that you will be seeing later, but I will be filming in like 2 minutes. So thank you for watching. I hope you all are doing well, and have a nice day.